One of the great things about this game is that it is so many things. It's an adventure and exploration game. It's an interactive story/anime. It's a town builder. It's a card game. It's fishing. And it's also a combat game with arguably one of the best combat systems of all time, in my opinion. And on that, I believe combat really matters in this game. Maybe more than anything. But why would I feel that way? Well, I look at how much resin refreshes cost, and constellations, aka battle passives, and that tells me all I need to know. I didn't come up with that conclusion myself. With the absurd amount of money one can spend on combat related things, Hoyo is screaming at me that it's a combat game. The resin you log in to use every day? What is it for? World bosses to level up your characters, talent books and weapon material domains to make your characters do more damage, artifact domains for the same reason, ley lines for level up materials including gold and EXP books. Stop and think long and hard about it and you realize there is not one thing in the game that you can use your daily resin on that isn't for making your character stronger, and thus doing more damage and surviving more damage in combat. But resin is the main rechargeable resource that makes people log on every day to spend it. It's such a precious resource, they even put a cap on it, with an abysmally low recharge rate. Resin can't be used for fishing, it can't be used for teapot, it can't be used for TCG. And believe me, I'm not saying it should be, we'd all hate that. The point is though, that the resin we log on to use every day is only used to make our character stronger. That's all resin is for. That daily loop of using your resin has one end goal: turn it into combat power. As well, the overwhelming majority of Hoyo's economy is centered around making characters stronger too. Every character has 6 constellations and every weapon has 4 possible refinements after the first copy. Hoyo sells this. This is where the majority of their money comes from. Not just a little majority, it is their economic model. Outside of C0 and R1, anything above is strictly power. You already have the character at C0 and weapon at R1. Buying any more copies doesn't change the character or weapon in any way except for combat efficiency. While there may be some Omega whales that C6 R5 because they just have it like that, a huge population of spenders are not doing it for the flex. Some people go for 1 or 2 constellations and with one single motivation: the combat power. I mean, what else are they getting out of it? Of course power is their motivation. Source: I'm one of those people. Why is the most expensive thing in the game, constellations, for sale? They don't unlock new stories, new hangouts, they don't unlock new outfits, new voice lines, customizations, or anything else of this sort for a character. It's literally just combat power. Let the fact that Hoyo makes the majority of its money selling constellations, or unlockable passives if we're being frank, tell you everything. I have C2 Navia because I wanted the combat passives. It gives her up to 36% crit rate on her skill. This means Hoyo sold her to me 2 times after C0. I didn't get anything out of it the second and third time I bought her other than more combat power. Now, I know this was my decision. This isn't coming from a place of complaint or regret or anything like that. It's coming from a place of examination of the systems Hoyo put in place. And I'm not even saying Hoyo put terrible systems in place. Hey, it is what it is as far as that goes. But the implications of those systems, when they're all combat related, is that on the main pillar, the game is a combat game. It is by their design that players, new or old, would assume that combat is the main focus. Daily resin can't be used for fishing or teapot or TCG. It's a currency that is exclusively used for building a character's strength. And the economy itself suggests the game is combat focused. You can buy a character up to 6 more times to unlock new passives, and it's not cheap. Imagine this scenario. You tell someone you play this game that has combat, exploration, quests, a good story, a town builder, all this cool stuff. But then they ask you how the company makes money, and your answer is, well, people spend $100 to $200 just to unlock a character's passive. It is totally logical for them to conclude, oh yeah, that game must be combat focused. Players can't and don't spend hundreds of dollars on TCG or Teapot. They spend $200 so Hu Tao doesn't have to use stamina when using a charge attack. Hoyo is literally selling combat. It is their main business model. People come here searching for different experiences, and whatever they're getting out of it is fine. Again, that's one of the great things about this game. So many players playing it for different reasons. But I feel like combat enthusiasts and mid-level spenders who are spending for combat power, maybe it's fair when they ask for just a little more. When you consider it, it's probably those mid-level spenders searching for combat power who gets the least value back from their investment, because free players get limitless value, and the motivation of heavy spenders isn't just the combat. As proven by the fact they wail on all characters, even the bad ones, or the ones find at lower constellations. They go above and beyond the needed power levels, whereas mid-spenders spend just enough to net them the max combat power needed to comfortably clear the hardest content. You may say, but if a mid-spender spends just enough to net them the max combat threshold they believe they need, is it correct then to frame them as not having received the value they asked for? In other words, if a mid-spender believes C2 Shogun to be the appropriate threshold to carry them through the hardest contents in the game, namely the Abyss, and this person spends to get C2, then isn't it wrong to say they didn't receive the power they paid for? Well, no and yes, but not really. It's complicated. You see, it's a relative scale. Free players aren't spending at all, so there's infinite value in what they receive. No money on input, but product received on output. That's infinite value. On the other end of the spectrum, heavy spenders have twofold value. Sure, it's extreme input, but max output the game allows as well. They aren't dumb. They know the power they're buying is way more than enough for anything the game throws at them. There's more to it than a desire to beat the hardest content at that point. They wouldn't go for C6, they'd be stopping at C2 if that's all they wanted and was all that was needed for them to clear the content. As well, the fact they are C6ing left and right shows that cold hard cash is also less of a concern for them. When concerning value, the means of the person in question should always be a consideration. What's a waste to some is a drop in the bucket for others. So, yeah, on the high end of the spectrum, value is skewed as well. The middle of that spectrum, that's where the value gets muddy, because it tends to be more flooded with players who are still playing the game with some level of budget, but want a particular level of power. They don't want to overspend by grabbing a character's unnecessary C4 if they don't have to, but they don't want to have a weak product that they can't clear things with at C0 or C1 either. These spenders, or sweet spotters, are players for whom a character's combat value becomes the most important. Not that it isn't important to free players or ultra spenders, but again, free players and ultra spenders aren't concerned with how much they're spending. Free players, because they're not spending, and ultra spenders because they're going to spend anyway, and it's likely not even going to affect them so much out of the game. It's the mid spenders aiming to sweet spot particular power spikes who are the most concerned with value. And by extension, it's the mid spenders who get less value back if it turns out there's few reasons to aim for those power spikes. No surprise then if mid spenders are the first to change their spending habits, particularly in an instance when they feel unchallenged. If they're sweet spotting power spikes but it turns out they need even more power, they may either leave it alone and be happy with what they have, or break the bank a little more, either on that particular character or future complementary ones. But on the other end of that, if a mid-level spender is sweet spotting power spikes, but it turns out they didn't need so much power after all, they're likely to just be done spending, and may even be a little regretful. Over time, if a player feels they have bought into a well enough account, they may just not spend any more at all. I'm not talking out of speculation here. This was my exact route as a mid-level spender. Before Sumeru's release, I was a mid-level spender. Maybe a higher mid-level spender sometimes, but mid-level. With every character at the game at C0 at minimum, and most with their signature weapons, but a good portion of characters at C1, C2, and even C3. Not only that, but I had 3 characters who I went all in on. I won't lie, one of my main motivations was that I liked the characters. But the other motivation was that I analyzed them to be, simply, very strong units at their max. In my mind, if I could get them where they needed to be, then I'd have less reason to spend in the future. Those 3 characters were C6 Yoimiya, C6 Shinha, and C6 Kokomi. The only one that kind of turned out not to be true was Kokomi, but even so I don't regret it, she's very strong. C6 Yoimiya and Shinha though are different. They really did transform my power levels. Shinha turned my Ayaka and Ganyu both into C6 units, and Yoimiya just blew through everything absolutely. And guess what? Once Sumeru dropped, I didn't spend anymore. I had reached that power cap once and for all. Granted, one could have considered me a heavy spender having 3 C6s, but again, I was always budgeting the whole time. After all, there's a reason other characters were C1 or even C0. Yeah, no, I was definitely spending on my 3 C6s with character power in mind, and once I had them, I stopped spending altogether. A situational heavy spender if you must, but certainly not an all-time habitual heavy spender. When I stopped though, it was quite drastic actually. I didn't break open the bank until Nilou's rerun. Not her initial run because, well, due to me not spending, I didn't have primogems for her. But I did pay to get her on her rerun, and even then, I just C0'd her. And I lucked out with the weapon. After that, I went right back to free. And after a while, I took a break from the game altogether for about 3 or 4 entire months. Fontaine brought me back, and to this day, I'm missing Lenny, Wriothesley, and Neuvillette. Why? Because I still wasn't spending. I found out my old triumvirate of C6s were still enough to just win everything, so I didn't care. It took Farina and Navia to make me spend a little more. 1, because I'm not going to miss an Archon, period, and 2, because I've been waiting for Shotgun Impact since forever. But the pattern still speaks for itself. From Mondstadt through Liyue and Inazuma, I went from owning every character, some with constellations, to Sumeru and Fontaine where I started dropping several banners. Honestly, the sign started halfway through Inazuma. I don't have Ayato, but from there I also don't have Sino, Baiju, Kaveh, Wriothesley, Neuvillette, or Lenny. I also don't have Klee. And yes, I did list Kaveh in there because I would always at least do enough pulls to get one copy of a 4-star, if not more. I got Zhongli C2 on his first banner trying to get C6 Xinyan, so yeah, not getting a 4-star is completely a huge deal for me. Not having Kaveh does count here. This section wasn't supposed to be so much about me. I just wanted to illustrate that I'm talking from an anecdotal position here, and less of a speculative one. I'm well aware that what I'm buying is combat, and when the needle didn't seem to ever move on the difficulty of in-game combat, the needle stopped moving for my wallet as well. It's just the truth. An ugly, sad truth for some, but the truth all the same. I was playing pay to win. Again, I'm not great at the game, so cut me some slack, alright? But again, let's rewind to what I just said there. I was playing pay to win. Not pay to dress up, not pay to build, not pay to listen, pay to win. That's what the game was selling me. That's what the game sold me. That's what it continues to sell to this day. From resin refreshes to constellations and temporary material packs in the shop, weapons, refinements, all of it. It's raw power. Again, if I was to tell someone that it's possible to spend $200 extra on a character after already receiving them once, and that person says, $200? What did you get out of buying the character a second time? And my answer is, they don't consume stamina after using a charge attack now. I'd find it absolutely understandable for that person to immediately assume the game is combat above all else. That's called making an informed assumption. That's called using context clues. It's not just a good conclusion to come to, I'd go so far as to say it's the right conclusion to come to. The same as if I told them, I spent $200 and got tons of Inazuma Otogi wood for building. And then I'd expect them to assume that house building and teapot gameplay is the forefront of the game. And if I told them I expected the main pillar of gameplay to be combat, I'd fully expect them to say, dude, why would you think that? They're selling you expensive as heck building materials, not combat. And I would hold that L because, yes. Flipping it back to the actual economy and what we're buying though, which is power, well, I think the point is clear. I can wrap that up. I'd like to circle back around to something I said. People play this game for many, many reasons, none of which are right or wrong reasons. Some just want a beautiful world to explore, some want to follow the good story and lore and see where it goes. Others are drawn in by the characters themselves with their combat prowess irrelevant. Some just want to build cool things. But there is a subset of players, a large subset, that is here for the actual combat gameplay. And I can't say that I think they're wrong for assuming that's what the main pillar of the game should be when examining the game's economy and resin systems. Not that those other pillars aren't massively important in their own right, but again, it's not like you can spend $200 to buy new hangout quest or teapot materials. What you can spend $200 on though, is allowing Yelan to use her elemental skill twice. So is it a crime if paying players want more combat related things to do in-game? 99.9999% of Hoyo's revenue comes from selling players an easier time with combat. That being the case, it's my belief that the sellers of this combat should provide adequate experiences to match those paying players. I get that most of the money comes from super whales, but devoted players are devoted players, and every 3 players willing to C1 a character are doing the equivalent of a C6 spender. Mid-spenders might not be the majority, but I'm sure their money does add up. They're the ones determining which banners do better than others after all. How do I conclude that? Well, again, free players aren't spending, and high spenders are consistently spending big bucks. It would be the mid-level spenders that sway banners one way or another, wouldn't it? They're the actual variable here. I'm sympathetic towards players who have combat as their highest pillar but feel they aren't getting enough of it. I'm even more sympathetic towards those who have combat as their highest pillar and spend and feel they aren't getting enough of it. To a degree, I'm also straight up empathetic, having been there, done that myself. And if someone has gotten way deep into the game, only to realize months or even years later that it's not the extremely combat heavy experience they thought it was, I also don't blame them for that, considering everything from resin to the economy would lead one to believe that it's not just a pillar, but the most important one. As for me, I've come to understand that. And I'm someone who is here for all the pillars combined. The need for combat is a little bit lacking for me, but man, exploration, the story, these characters, the lore nuggets, and even fun things like Teapot and TCG too. Yes, I do build my Teapot every update. I think I'm great at it, in fact. I'm an architect. And every now and then, I check out TCG too, especially for Battle Pass points. For me personally, the package as a whole is so good that it makes up for only having moderate amounts of combat, especially challenging combat. It's why I still log on every day, check out events, and do quests. Just, I'm a little less concerned with building characters these days compared to earlier days. I still do, of course, everyone does. But it doesn't have to be the most perfect build, and I certainly will skip characters altogether now if they don't interest me, as opposed to the early days when I had to have everyone, whether I liked them personally or not. The combat isn't deep enough for me to do that anymore. Again, I lean very hard on the other pillars too. I'm fine, man. It's a lot harder to get $1 from me nowadays, I'll say that. If Farina wasn't the lovely protection-needing Archon she is, or technically isn't, but you know what I mean. And if Navia wasn't so hilariously strong, murking enemies with like 300 to 400k on a crit shot, my wallet would still be closed. Especially because we got the yearly double top-up bonus reset. If not for that, then I'm not sure if even Navia would have made it through. So don't get used to it. Okay, Hoyo? Don't get used to it. I threw you a little bit, but by no means am I back to the days of C6 Uemio, C6 Shinha, or C6 Kokomi. I don't think that will ever happen again. But anyway, I'm making it about me again. Point is, if combat is the pillar someone's heavily leaning on and that pillar crumbles for them, I'm not going to tell them they were wrong for believing that was supposed to be the main pillar. Not after seeing that they can spend a couple $100 just to make their character stronger. This game is a lot of things, including a combat game. In my opinion, the main thing, because anything that's sold for $200 not being the main thing is absolutely absurd to me. But again, I'm not the company, I'm a player. As logical as my reasoning is to me, in the end, I'm not calling the shots, the company is. We can always voice our opinions on things and hope for change though. Just this late in the game? This might be what it is, friend. It might be time to accept it like I have, if you haven't. Like I said, I'm fine. The combat in this game doesn't have to change at all, and I'd still be here for the long haul. The other pillars are enough to keep me invested on their own. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to see more combat and harder challenges. And then again, hey, you never know. Those local legends enemies in Fontaine? Beastly. The fact that my party got killed by one was so refreshing to me. It was almost a foreign concept that I could actually die. So hey, maybe they're listening, you know? But oh boy, the moment those suckers show up in the actual abyss though, Archons help us all. Thanks for listening.